ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to attend today's National Executive Committee meeting at NASREC to discuss the Phala Phala matter amid calls from some quarters for him to resign. Now, Ramaphosa recused himself from yesterday's National Working Committee discussions, arguing that he did not want any leaders to be intimidated by his presence. The ANC President is also pondering on taking the High Panel Section 89 report on legal review at the Constitutional Court. So to help us unpack some of these matters and other developments, we are joined via Zoom by Political Analyst and Visiting Professor at the Wits School of Governance, Professor Susan Booysen. Thanks so much for your time and welcome to Morning Live, Prof.
Thank you, Sakina. Good morning.
So what should we read first and foremost into President Ramaphosa's attendance at yesterday's ANC NWC meeting, given that he didn't attend on Friday, and then also saying that he didn't want to intimidate anyone? What should we make of all of these developments?
Yes, Sakina, that was fascinating, that the question of whether he should be present or not on Friday at the earlier NEC meeting, which was aborted late last week. He was asked not to be there when it was deemed appropriate for him not to be there. So it is really a big battle, and today he will be at the NEC, but then be led by the meeting as to whether he should be remain in person, since he will be discussed. I think there's a general frustration among many of the NEC members that President Ramaphosa did not appear in person, although one can imagine, as is usually the case when a person is discussed, that that person is not present. But yet there may be questions which only the person directly can answer. Given President Ramaphosa's history of utterances or no utterances on the Phala Phala matter, it could probably lead to a bit of a standoff, if not a big standoff in NEC, should he be asked direct questions. And then again, as is legally his right not to incriminate himself by answering. So it is a very contentious matter, but it's probably appropriate that he is there, but then stand aside as the meeting requests.
Prof, what would be your expert assessment of how, firstly, the ANC has handled this entire process thus far, and what the president should actually do? How would you advise him if you were in that position?
Well, I'm happy that he will not be relying on my advice, but indeed, we see that the ANC itself has really played it very carefully. This whole weekend, matters unfolded, since Friday, matters unfolded at a breathtaking speed, going from last Thursday night, President getting close to resigning, then being persuaded. Friday, it became confirmed that he will not be resigning. The meeting started unfolding. The ANC itself was very careful not to make any formal statements except on the most basic process aspects. So it was really a party that is caught in the middle of one of these biggest predicaments. Its sitting president and the president of the organization being led into possible charges suggested by the global panel that there are sufficient grounds, prima facie grounds for charges or for Parliament to proceed with possible impeachment hearings. ANC still remained quiet. It was really in this vortex of contesting trends and contradictory contesting trends, where on the one hand, yes, the president came close to resigning himself. On the other hand, the processes of dissecting the legality and the appropriateness of the recommendations of the global report, that came to be contested. And still the ANC only did the minimal statements on the process unfolding. We will recall that one of the options that Ramaphosa had late last week was also to withdraw from the ANC's election race forthcoming in about 10 days. And that I think, help the ANC see the reality of what it means that there is no obvious, clear person second in charge to President Cyril Ramaphosa. And I think it was a wake-up call for the ANC. It was as if they were quite helpless in the process, had not been anticipating that they could probably come to this point of not just seeing the country plunged into uncertainties, policy uncertainties, monetary and fiscal uncertainties, etc., but also the organization's whole election process probably being rendered totally chaotic.
But Prof, what do you mean when you say the ANC suddenly realizes that they'd have no clear second in charge? There's David Mabuza, who's the deputy president of not just the country, but also the party. So there is a clear second in charge. So what seems to be the problem?
Yes, my comment is much more political, not the constitutional matter. Of course, Deputy President Didi Mabuza is constitutionally straight in that line of succession. Should President Ramaphosa resign, Didi Mabuza will be taking over. Simultaneously, is Didi Mabuza without much political legitimacy or support within the organization. And we know he didn't make it into the nomination race. He has hardly been present as Deputy President of the country. So he's not a person who can carry the ANC forward to keep it together and to keep all the different factional contests under control. He just doesn't command that type of legitimacy on the organization. Thus, yes, legally, constitutionally could step in, but that would not have been a situation that the ANC remains on track. And then should he have had to step in as deputy president, he would not have been successful at the ANC conference elections that are forthcoming. And then there would have been another person elected, and then soon those pressures would have mounted for the new person to take over. So, and that would have created a lot of instability. But it's not to say that South Africa and the ANC are not facing this type of instability in the immediate future or in the near future. It is just that there is a hold on matters, probably these constitutional court challenges to the report on several grounds that we saw unfolding over the weekend. And then it is a matter postponed, it's not a matter resolved.
Which is very interesting and fascinating all the same, because again, you know, without unnecessarily belaboring the Didi Mabuza point, you know, where has this been tested? You know, how do we know? Because if a vacancy were to arise today, let's say if President Cyril Ramaphosa had, in fact, as has been reported, followed through upon with his resignation, what would that have meant? Where would that have left the ANC and, of course, the country? Would Didi Mabuza not have stepped into that void?
Yes, he definitely would have. And there would have been a lot of damage control done by the ANC. Didi Mabuza would have been elevated. He would have been accepted into that position. And so there's no doubt that those processes would have been unfolding simultaneously. There would have been, as we even saw over the weekend, many reassurances from the ANC, many people trying to ensure South Africa and the world beyond South Africa that economic policies, other policies to stop, to contain corruption, capture type of, generally just corruption in state operations would continue unfolding. There was much damage control, preemptive damage control already being done in that process. And that would have unfolded had Didi Mabuza today been the president.
So looking at the decision to take this panel report on judicial review, what is your sense of the process that led to that particular determination? And I know you're not part of it, but how would they have arrived at this is the best way to proceed for President Ramaphosa, those who are advising him? And also, is that something that you think is best under the circumstances, Prof?
Sakina, yes, indeed. There is a political side first, which really showed the political damages because the ANC had not been prepared for a moment such as this, even if the Phala Phala allegations are now a good 5 months old. And from February 2020, people must have known that this is a possibility that it will burst into the public space. And then came the Phala Phala report, and we saw how legal minds were really working overtime. We don't know whether some of it was spontaneous, to what extent it was spontaneous, or also instigated, that there is really a campaign that we saw unfolding in front of our eyes over the weekend of Save Ramaphosa. But many legal minds came forth with a range of queries to the report, ranging from the PRECA is not the right legislation to be applied, to exceeding its mandate, to misinterpreting the term prima facie, which in legal terms apparently means that not as we use it in common parlance, of sort of at first impression type of information that seems convincing, but in legal terms, prima facie means that there has to be sufficient evidence to prove a fact. And in the Phala Phala report, when it talks about the type of information that was used to reach its findings, and the report, informal report, is very honest about the type of information it relies on. It clearly shows that there is not sufficient evidence, also because the other state agencies' investigations and progress on that, if there had been definitive progress at this time, that had not been made available to the global panel. And just on the basis of that, it is clear that there is not sufficient prima facie evidence to prove a fact at this stage, and that it would be premature, therefore, in these arguments that we heard over the weekend, to take this into Parliament for a decision on impeachment hearings, that there should, in fact, first be a court ruling on the sufficiency of the facts, or that the additional facts in due course become available. And so we saw really a whole political landscape, a whole political life unfolding in front of our eyes over the weekend, just before and over the weekend. And now we are at the point again where we were about, let me say, a few weeks ago, when there are allegations, there are suspicions of wrongdoing in a Phala Phala case, but still we are not no definitive point. And in fact, it would probably be indeed premature for Parliament to take a decision on instituting an impeachment committee if it is subject to a court of law ruling on the sufficiency, legality of the Phala Phala report.
So you therefore suggest Parliament should then put that process on ice while the report is taken on review. But for the President, in his personal capacity, is that the best course of action? Because obviously there would be various schools of thought, one of which would say, well, if the President is innocent of all of these or allegations being put against him, why doesn't he just not let Parliament go through the process, and he will have an opportunity to prove his innocence through that process?
Yes, indeed. The President would probably benefit from letting the processes, almost to use a presidential term here, to let the processes unfold and let all the investigations run their course and then come to a definitive point. That would be legally, procedurally, the best way to go. Personally, of course, one has a big question in one's mind, why on Thursday night, from Wednesday to Thursday, he became very ready to resign, ready to throw in the towel. And then in a personal domain, that was probably where his mind was, rather than fight the allegations over many, many months. And rather than plunge South Africa into a whole amount of uncertainty. But either way, there is going to be uncertainty and instability and continuous questions being asked about the President's involvement and what really transpired there, whether he's resigned or not. And this is a situation which I think delegates at the ANC conference will have foremost in their minds when they consider their options. And this is, of course, one of the great contradictions of this current moment in South African and ANC politics, that the president is by far the front runner, 8 of the 9 provinces, and indications that he would be able to get a majority of the around 4,000 delegate votes. And yet there are these massive questions hanging on around his future. And of course, that will let attention shift very much to the deputy presidency who is being elected into that position. And so one of the effects of this contest that we see unfolding in the last few days will be that the Ramaphosa faction in the ANC will come to a realization, surprisingly they had not been there yet, that all power, all their influence efforts would have to go into a candidate that they believe, as they had been promising in the last few days, would be able to take forward the state reform and legislative implementation and reform processes started under Ramaphosa.
So just a final question, Prof. You're on record saying that if the president were to resign, as was indicated that he was thinking of doing, he would actually retain much of his dignity. Do you still maintain that?
Yes, probably yes, because the court cases that are going to unfold, impeachment hearings that are going to unfold, are going to be humbling and in many spaces probably humiliating. It would have been an easy way, maybe a dignified way out, if we take into consideration how brutal these impeachment processes can be, should it come to that point. And it could very well, in due course, come to that point, and even just trying to stop the processes from reaching impeachment hearing point will take a lot of dissection as to what actually happened, what the questions are, the answers are that come to the questions that still prevail even after President Ramaphosa had submitted his forms of evidence to the Mhobo panel. Many of the questions did remain unanswered, and these matters are going to become a brutal focus of politics moving forward in the next few months.
Well, Prof, we'll have to leave it there. As you say, it will still unfold for a while yet. So thanks so much for your time. Political Analyst and Visiting Professor at the Wits School of Governance, Professor Susan Booysen, helping us unpack the developments in the ruling party ahead of today's NEC meeting at NASREC.